In our next segment, we explore how organizations are engaging innovators to co-create value by adopting emerging technologies and how this is contributing to the transformation of the sustainability landscape. Your session will be moderated by Mr. Edmas Neo, Vice President, Group Transformation Office at Mandai Wildlife Group. Edmas drives the organization's digital transformation and open innovation initiatives and leads the technology development across the Mandai Precinct Rejuvenation Program. With him are invited panelists, Dr. Cheng Haur, Deputy CEO, Life Sciences and Operations, Chief Life Sciences Officer, Mandai Wildlife Group. Also, Ms. Janet Sarah Neo, Vice President, Corporate Sustainability and Government Affairs, Lazada. Mr. David To, CEO, NTUitive, and Ms. Ling Lim, Head of APAC Business Development, Global Innovation at 500 Global. Over to you, Edmas.
Sherry, thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. A very good morning. I'm Edmas, your moderator for today's panel discussion. As you know, corporate innovation and sustainability are the latest buzzwords. Increasingly, organizations are looking at adopting innovative technologies in solving meaningful challenges. What's more, we are also seeing growing interest in the sustainable innovation space, which is a topic widely discussed at COP26 and at Switch Singapore recently. This morning, we have the honor to have with us 4 distinguished panelists joining me to discuss on how deep tech is changing the landscape of animal care, biodiversity, conservation, and sustainability. Dr. Cheng, David, Ling, and Janet, a very warm welcome to the panel discussion. My colleague Shirley has briefly introduced you. I'm sure our audience would like to know more about yourself and the organization. So I'd like to invite you to give a 30 seconds further introduction about yourself and organizations before we go into our main discussion. How about we start with Dr. Cheng?
Morning, Edmas. Morning, everyone. Fellow panelists, good to be here today. So I was trained as a veterinarian. I've always wanted to work with animals, and I've been trained as a veterinarian. After graduated, I was working in Australia, vaccinating dogs and cats for a while. And I came to Singapore and actually got a job as a vet with Singapore Zoo. So since then, you know, that's been sort of my career trajectory. So I ended up working with the zoo as a veterinarian, moving on to general management, operating Night Safari for its first 10 years, and then gone on to more general management. And since then, I've actually worked in a zoo in Australia, Perth Zoo, as well as a major commercial zoo in China as well. So interestingly, all the exposure to these different zoos in different areas, they're very strong in different parts. They engage their visitors very differently. So that's given me great exposure. And then now I'm back with Mandai and continue to engage people with wildlife and continue to take care of wildlife.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Cheng. Next, shall we have David to share more about yourself and NTUitive?
Hi, everyone. My name is David To, and I'm the CEO of NTUitive. NTUitive is the wholly owned subsidiary of Nanyang Technological University, where we are responsible for commercializing the intellectual property and patents developed out of the scientists at the universities. That would include professors and postdocs and grads. So I've been with NTUitive for the past 8 years, since 2013. Before that, trained as worked in finance and banking for about 20 years. Before that, worked as an engineer for 2 years. Graduated with degrees in engineering and arts and science.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we used to be neighbor. I was just, in the same block as you, in, block 7, 69 there, over there. Yeah. So next, we shall have Janet, right? Janet, is a big day for Lazada, isn't it?
It is. I think many people might have also stayed up last night to get your favorite gifts, for the year end. So today I'm here. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for Lazada, and I have been in this field. I just always have believed that business could build a better world, and we need sustainability. Back then, this work was like a blank face for many people, and this year I can say we have indeed, as globally, reached a tipping point and mainstreaming sustainability. And I'm so incredibly excited to be here at the Innovation Forum. My first role was actually a backend engineer assistant back in Silicon Valley in a high-tech startup. So it's really about innovation, disrupting markets, and applying, tech to enable new lifestyle, new changes, right? And this year and now, I'm really seeing the convergence, of business, entrepreneurship, innovation, and sustainability really coming very close together. And that is, I think we have a hope for our future because of this. The second hat that I carry, I'm on a board of Temasek Foundation, and under Livability Challenge Fund, we seed a lot of startups and new innovations. And I'm super proud because a lot of times we didn't know we have scientists from Singapore, we have engineers, we have expertise in Singapore that can bring about solutions that can go global. Yeah, so we are not so much of a small dot, but we are a big impact, Yeah, so look forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, definitely this 2 years is a great year for sustainability with so much interest in this space. Yeah. Next we have Eileen. Eileen is so passionate about, in the ecosystem, and I got to know her when we were working on mentoring all the different startups. Yeah, so Eileen, share more about what you're doing at 500 with us.
Thanks, Edmas. I lead business development for APAC at 500 Global. So a lot of people know us as a VC fund. We've invested in over 2,500 companies globally. Last year itself, we actually announced our ESG framework, which I can talk about a little bit more later. But apart from investing in startups, we actually also run a lot of programs to help grow, scale, incubate, grow, and scale startups itself. We also work a lot with corporates. And definitely in terms of this year itself, a lot of corporates increasingly are thinking about sustainability in order to create a relevant business for the years to come. And we see ourselves playing a big role there because we can help them identify different parts within the value chain of where you can actually adopt more sustainable practices. And the beauty of it is when we actually merge, what the corporate needs together with startup solutions as well. And so it's a win-win for both. But the second hat that I wear is actually, I run a program called Young Founders Summit, which is actually a startup program for high school students. So Edmas is a mentor, so thank you very much. I think what's really encouraging, and Belinda mentioned this earlier on, is that for the next generation, this is their life, right? They live in it, they care about it, they know it impacts them. And so a lot of the solutions that we see the young people coming up with actually have sustainability as an anchor, whether it's environmental or it's human sustainability or social sustainability. So we're very excited always seeing all this innovation in this space. And I think there's so much more that we can do together.
Thank you, Eileen. Really, the program is really good, right? I'm mentoring a team from Japan, another team from Singapore. I can see so much passion in these young people. I think we have really great new generation coming up in terms of, trying to create solutions to solve meaningful problems. Yeah, so Dr. Cheng, David, Eileen, Janet, thank you very much for introducing yourself. I'm sure our audience will be able to learn much from your experience. The last 7 years, I have been very active in helping to build the Singapore startup ecosystem, running acceleration and innovation programs. I've also seen many interesting startups with great solutions, ideas, and technology. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could deploy some of these technologies into the sustainability domain and create more positive impact? But then I realized that not many of them are actually plugged in to this domain, and they are not exposed to the many opportunities in this area for them to co-innovate. So Dr. Cheng, you're a veteran in this space, as a Chief Life Science Officer at Mandai, President of Southeast Asian Zoos Aquarium and Association, and Chairman of the Board of Trustees Species 360. I'm sure you have access to first-hand challenges and many opportunities facing this industry. Would you be able to share with us what are the most immediate challenges in animal care, biodiversity, conservation domains that you think technology might be able to play a part in solving these problems?
Yes, indeed, Edmas. So I think one of the major issues that are facing us today are the massive loss of biodiversity due to human activity. So, and a lot of it, habitat loss and overexploitation, poaching and whatnot, resulting to many species facing extinction. And all of this is because of human behavior. It's just as well that, human ingenuity, all the deep technologies that we can use that to help us solve some of the problems. So in the wild, when we talk about protecting species in the wild, some of the technologies that are being used like tracking devices, the satellite tags, because of the miniaturization. Now we are able to use them to track even smaller and smaller species. So allowing the conservationists to know where the species are, where the protected species are, so that they can be better protected, devising better conservation actions. So that is also things like species recognition software using AI, so that when we have these camera traps in the wild, that also helps scientists to figure out that where the species are and what needs to be done. So that's what happens in the wild. And of course, zoos like us are very important conservationists as well. We help with the conserving species by taking care of populations of animals in our parks away from the wildlife habitat, and we use this to connect people with wildlife. Belina talked a lot about that earlier, and that's very important if we need people to change their behavior to be more wildlife friendly, more conservation focused. So when we take care of animals in our parks, it is very important that we ensure their welfare, and a lot of this new technology allow us to take care of animals better, to improve their livelihood. A very important role of zoos is to actually help animal breed, propagate. Just in the event that the populations in the wild will go extinct, then at least we have an assurance colony. So sometimes some animals need a little bit of a helping hand. So, a great example is a giant panda. So when that happens, we use technology such as assisted reproductive technology to help them make more babies, and then take great care of them, and if need to, when there is a chance, to release them back into the wild. So those are some of the examples.
Thank you, Dr. Cheng. The panda is really a great addition to our zoo. And I'm sure that this year is really also a very great year, right, for a lot of newborns in our zoo, right? Yeah. Okay, very, very interesting. Yeah. David, as a CEO of NTUitive, responsible for commercializing the university scientific research and incubating startup, I'm sure you have seen many interesting emerging technologies coming out from the research institute. Could you tell us more about the technology trends and how these trends may affect the innovation directions, and especially in the sustainability areas?
Okay. I think globally, not just at NTU, there's a lot of innovative research piling into areas including energy generation, renewable energy generation, energy storage, energy transmission. Then the next space is in water. Lots of research going into advanced membrane technology for desalination, which requires less energy, as well as membranes used for wastewater treatment. Then we also have a lot of money being poured into the food space, alternative proteins coming from lab-grown meat, as well as plant-based proteins. And then the last is in waste management. So in waste management, we're looking at ways to recycle waste as well as get rid of waste, whether it's through pyrolyzing the waste or seeing whether we can valorize some of that, recycle some of that waste, particularly precious metals coming in from electronics. But I think energy is the so-called 500-pound gorilla inside this space. And there's as you can see in the transition towards electric vehicles, there's also a lot of funding going into hydrogen, which currently is kind of the rock star in the energy space. There's also, interestingly, emerging research into areas such as artificial photosynthesis, how we can look at ways in which we replicate what's going on in nature with respect to photosynthesis, because at the end of the day, what we'd really like is for a system that can generate chemically with the activation of light to produce starch and sugars for food, as well as for energy. So there's a lot of exciting research and innovation going on in these areas related to sustainability.
Right, very interesting. I think one of the things that you mentioned about waste management, I think at the zoo, we also have, been exploring, looking at ways that we might be able to manage some of the animal waste. Maybe Dr. Cheng, you can, share a bit on that and then see whether David has some solutions on that front.
No, indeed, we have a special challenge. Obviously, we take care of a lot of animals, and big animals like the elephants and the hippopotamus, they eat a lot, and they also a lot comes out at the end. So I think in Singapore, the special concern is the concern about the animal waste potentially polluting the waterway. So from that point of view, there is a very strict requirement to how the animal generated waste to be disposed of. So we are currently looking at more innovative ways that would meet the requirement from a legal point of view. So currently they are being collected and incinerated. We would like to be able to recycle them, to be able to use them so that they are not incinerated and then go back to generate even more greenhouse gases. But from a recycling point of view, there is a concern that if we are not able to get rid of potential pathogens in the waste, then they will not be allowed to be recycled, for example, to be used as fertilizers. So right now we're still exploring, how to manage the waste so that they can be much more sustainable, that can be reused as well. So that is certainly a big chunk of issue that we need to continue to explore.
Yeah, certainly. I think, audience, out there, if you have any of this solution, we'll be very happy to hear from you as well, right? Do reach out to us. Yeah. Okay, Janet, you have dedicated your career to integrate mainstream sustainable business with circular economy and value creation partnership. And you were also head of corporate sustainability and communication at global giants like Heineken, Fuji Xerox, and UN. From your experience of being involved in the sustainability field, do you think, the recent interest in sustainability is more of a hype, or is it something that can translate into actual impact?
Oh, I would say, I think on the plus point, it's that, we no longer need to convince people that there's an urgency in climate change. We no longer have to convince people that when you go to the forest, every day we are losing biodiversity, there are species that are endangered. It's becoming real for people because they can experience it. I think from the business angle, the business case is no longer needs to be convinced. Today is not a question of should you do sustainability. Today the question is how much are you going to do? How fast are you going to do it? I think these are the two questions in organizations that they need to think about. And therefore, it brings about the whole notions around how do you think of solutions that don't exist before? And that requires, people say about think out of the box, right? But if you have no framing, then how do you go about doing that? If you don't know a circle, then how are you going to describe that, right? So I think that's where the whole idea around collaboration and diversity, having people from different expertise. And I truly believe in this decade, it is the era of biodiversity, conservationists, environmentalists, 15 years ago when we started doing sustainability reporting disclosure. And once I talk about human rights or biodiversity at the board level or the management team, they were like, this is very far away from the business. I think it's really not our thing. But in this 10 years, the next 10 years, technology is going to unleash impact and incredible opportunity, right? That we can also integrate trade and business commercial element, or I call it the economic principles, to fund impact that goes into environment. And then just think about, I mean, here in Lazada, one example is that most people ask like platforms, you sell everything. So how do we know you're selling anything unethical, right? And then the question also is that people are already selling online. This is the trend that's going to stay. So, but what the role of the platform is to ensure that trust and safety is what we want for both the sellers and the buyers, right? And this year we took a real big stand around fighting against wildlife trafficking. It's not something that we never do before. It has always been in our business operations, but we never talk about it. And we joined WWF, Anti-Wildlife Trafficking, on this technology collaboration part. So this was a very interesting example because typically we never know how we can work with scientists from the business perspective, right? So with the Wildlife Coalition, we have, I think, more than 40 tech companies, social media companies come together. Although there's a competition element in the business, but because there's a coalition under WWF, we could share like keywords from our risk management system of what is the illegal wildlife listings that we see in the market. We could actually share. So we know in Southeast Asia, one of the most trafficked item is ivory, elephants ivory. Yeah, so we learned from WWF and the coalition that when people smuggle, they won't write ivory smuggle or something. They will come up in very creative ways, like putting an icon, or they will describe it as mammoth or some other animal, but the picture is actually ivory. And they take the trade like during specific times. And we count on, they gave us the keywords because they're always monitoring that, right? So we could integrate into the technology systems that we have. And it provides us a way to do even a much earlier detection. And we could investigate and remove all these listings even before a trade could take place. And just with that, right, we have removed at least 60 of these illegal listings on ivories and make sure that conservation and wildlife trade doesn't take place on the platform. Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly very important use of data analytics, insights, and AI, right? You stop the trade before it even happens. I'm sure Dr. Ching can really feel it, right? Yeah, I mean, so much into animal care. Yeah, but I'm sure all this will require a lot of technologies, a lot of new emerging ideas and technology, which I'm sure Eileen is so familiar with, right? With 500, they have been investing in so many different startups and a passion in ecosystem development. So Eileen, I think another thing about, driving technology is the money, right? The investment. If, maybe you can share with us what are the investment trends relating to the sustainability area, and as investors, right, or startup, accelerators, how do we encourage more technologies to develop their business ideas or their technologies to be able to support the sustainability field, or even, in terms of their business model, to think about their downstream impact on the environment?
Thanks, Edmas. Gosh, there's so many questions in there. Okay, let me try and tackle that, right? Now, I think first and foremost, when we talk about funding itself, one thing I do want to share is, yes, in today's tech world, people always look at VCs, right? But VCs, especially in this space, I think VCs cannot be the only source of funding. So thankfully, there are already more and more funds like Temasek and BlackRock set up that new fund to really focus on investing in sustainable startups. However, and it really cannot just lie on the traditional VCs. The reason why is because depending on the definition of what sustainability startups actually mean, right? Certain funds are set up to invest in that and certain aren't. So let me just draw an example. 500 Global is not an impact fund, right? We integrate ESG today in the sense that when we evaluate our startups, we do look at their ESG frameworks and policies. Most of the time, startups don't have them. Then we work with them to actually integrate that over time. But we don't invest in impact startups on the get-go. And you'll find that if you read into it, a lot of VCs will make that distinction. Why? Because it's still LPs, right? There's still a perception that when you invest in deep tech, climate tech startups, for example, the returns are going to take a long time. It's going to take beyond the 10 years of your fund life cycle. So a lot of VCs will make the distinction. That's also why I feel that funding should come and can come from other avenues as well. Obviously, we need to change the mindsets of the LPs, but this is also where people like corporates like Mandai, right, can actually play a role in investing longer term in some of these solutions. But then let me talk about what is it that we can do, right? For us, there are a few things. Apart from investing, we look at ourselves as builders. So we actually run programs right now with UNDP and Magic in Malaysia. It's called the Social Impact Challenge Accelerator. So it's actually focusing on 5 areas: upcycling, healthcare, elderly care, education, and also inclusive society. So really helping these startups who originally thought of themselves as social enterprises and non-profit organizations, by helping them change that mindset entirely to also have a good financial business angle to it while measuring impact. So we're pushing them to measure both financial but also social impact. And honestly, sometimes there's some resistance there, but I think we see our role as really driving more sustainability businesses that are sustainable in the long run. Right. So in Singapore as well, we work with National Youth Council, who are really mobilizing the youth to create solutions that they care about, that they see. And we're talking everything from environmental challenges to human and social challenges as well. So that's one thing that we can do: help them build, help them think how to create a sustainable venture. The second one is integration. And we see this as integrating ESG in both startups and corporates. So for example, when we work with we have a fintech company in Korea who basically uses AI to evaluate credit scoring and everything. And in that AI tool itself, obviously, they end up really just landing to the same old people without really extending financial inclusion. So we work with them to make sure that they actually change and imbue in their AI model, right, new tools that enable them to actually help more people access affordable financing. We also work with them, for example, to identify that, hey, only under 20% of your management, your board are female. You need to increase that. Can you increase that? And we set targets together with them. Now, as startups start thinking about this, if they are a startup who don't naturally have environmental solutions in place, what are they going to do? They're going to think of solutions. They're going to find other startups who have these solutions and then partner with those other startups. So that's also how we see the role of corporates as well. As we work with a corporate, so for example, was speaking to a large corporate in Malaysia, and we work with Petronas in Malaysia, right? So as they think about how do I transition from an oil and gas company into a future of energy, future of mobility, future of resources kind of company, at which part of my value chain can I integrate some of these new solutions? I can't build it on my own. Can I find startups to build it for me or with me? Right? And then the other thing also is that, can I think of new business models where, again, I can co-create with a startup, or I can build these ventures internally and invest in this because I believe that this is going to be the future of my business. So a lot of the things that we do is really around mindset changing, because I think Jenna was saying that today we don't have to convince people that it's needed again, but then there is still the element of, how do I make this something that I can see returns in the next few years, right? So that's a lot of the things that we're trying to shift.
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right? When it comes to investing, for the LPs, definitely they want to see returns, but there are also family offices now also looking at value investing, and I think more and more they are more concerned about where their money are put into. But definitely, as an investor myself, I also be interested to see what are the returns. Yeah, but like you say, rightly, that the startup do not really need to be exactly the impact startup, but their technology might be able to help enable, right? Yeah, the cause and the mission, right? So for example, like Janet, you mentioned about using AI, data analytics to identify certain keywords. I'm sure, AI startup would be able to play a very strong role in that. And Dr. Cheng, I understand that Mandai, we are all, starting to look at working with the startup to solve some of our problems, right? Bring in new innovations rather than the normal traditional procurement approach. And we work with IMDA, Open Innovation Platform. So, maybe you can share some of the advantages in working with startups through open innovations like that. What do you see?
Well, in our field, we have a lot of issues, a lot of problems. So quite often when we go out on procurement, we're saying that, okay, we have this problem. We think that we need this solution. Can you come and help us to solve this? But I think with this sort of innovation platform, what we can say is that we have these problems, and then we just sort of put it out there, and then different people may say, oh, okay, we should solve the problem from this point of view. And then there could be someone else to say, well, actually, you can look at it from another point of view. So rather than being fixed on how it should be, how the problem should be solved, what we're saying that, this is the problem, this is the outcome that we need. So hopefully that, different startups out there with different technologies, different background, different experiences, they may come up with different solutions, even different way of defining the problem that we haven't even thought of, to say that, if you look at the problem from this point of view, then you can solve it from this, from another angle. Okay, sort of the most straightforward technology is that, if you have a hammer, that's only one way you can solve the problem, right? But in fact, if you allow the different startups, that they have different technologies, and I think the most important thing is that while there are different technologies, it could even be a case of, combining different technologies together. And sometimes technologies sort of invented to solve one particular problem, but quite often, they are full of examples where, in fact, when you can be a bit more creative to use the technology to solve different problems and combining them to solve problems in an innovative way. So that's what we're trying to do. We quite often, from our point of view, we may be a little bit tunnel vision. We think that this is a problem, it should be solved like this. But hopefully by going into this innovation platform, different people will look at it differently to say that, I will consider this, consider combining different technologies together. So that's the outcome that we hope to be able to achieve with this approach.
Right, thank you. I think there are so many ways to be able to achieve the outcome, right? Different approaches, and some of them, we cannot really pen it down, put it into a very fixed requirement specification and go through a normal procurement process, right? So I think open innovations like that is really, be able to help reach and bring in more startup into this sustainable space. And I know that one of the key pillars in NTUitive is really working with corporates and partners, right, to bridge some of these solutions from the universities and your incubated startups. Maybe you can share more about the program, and if corporates are interested to work with you, what are the channels and what are the resources they can tap into?
Right. So at the university here, we have a very large number of corporate research collaborations. The most notable and largest of them all is Rolls-Royce, because Rolls-Royce is a fairly significant contributor of Singapore's GDP as well. We also have collaborations with Global Foundries, a semiconductor wafer manufacturing company, Hewlett-Packard, Sibana Jurong, SMRT, ST Engineering, Singtel. These are just a few of the large ones. And from our office perspective, NTUitive, which is the commercialization and licensing office, we cut maybe about 100 to 140 licenses a year, of which 60 to 70% of these go to SMEs and our spin-off companies. Annually, we're creating about 10 to 15 new spin-off companies from professorial research. And philosophically, from a licensing perspective, we're trying to level up our SMEs and create value capture, increasing value capture from some of these companies, which will be able to level up their product portfolio or offerings and make themselves more competitive and or sustainable, right? So there are other instances where we also form joint ventures with some SMEs to commercialize the IP. So we both will take equity stakes in the new joint ventures so as to create win-win value propositions for both parties.
Right, very interesting. Yeah, and talking about joint ventures, creating new spin-off, I think venture building is a recent new trend beyond just accelerating startups, or investing in startup. We are seeing a growing trend in that. And this question I would like to really learn from Janet and Eileen relating to entrepreneurship and venture building. Right, I read that from a Business Time, Lazada tops the chart with 480 alumni who are now founders or CEOs of startups. What do you think is that's so unique about Lazada that you can create this kind of entrepreneurial culture, right, from your group itself? And maybe Eileen, you're so involved in driving youth entrepreneurship and mentoring startups. What are the kind of elements that we are looking at, in order to be able to do more of the venture building, and what are the trends that you're seeing there?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. So just adding on, right, your question earlier, you mentioned is sustainability right now a hype or not? I think sustainability, when you look at it, it's maybe 5-10 years behind first entrepreneurship, and then the wave around digital came along, and then sustainability is now the next wave. So what we're seeing also in Lazada, right, is that when Lazada started 9 years ago, it was like an uncharted ground. Nobody believed that e-commerce could take off in Southeast Asia. There was no infrastructure. There was no even demand, right? So people who work in Lazada, even right now, we are a little bit in the mesh of, we are still a 9-year-old startup, but we have become such a gigantic corporation. So we need to function two ways, right? But yet, at the same time, when we look at the growth of e-commerce or digital commerce in this region, currently, I think the latest numbers, the e-commerce penetration is still less than 10% in the whole of Southeast Asia. So can you imagine, right, the 90% of growth that's still out there for the e-commerce players or digital commerce players to go and figure out how that's being done. So I think in one thing is that in that uncertainty, in that playbook that nobody knows what to do, you just have to put yourself in there, right? And that's how you also tell, is it a hype or not? You can tell it's not a hype when people can tell you what they're doing, what they have learned, what the pain points, how they have failed, or what didn't work. And they try again until it works. And the second part is about collaboration. How do you move fast? So today, just now, I mentioned that we don't need to convince about the need for sustainability, but we need to convince on the how and what's the return, right? So in anything that has to be sustainable needs to have the economic principle at the base. Without that, it just cannot function in the long term. So today, the hype maybe is like everybody cares about climate. But if you do a project that is only about climate, there's a lot of impact there, but there's no way that the economic fundamentals are just not sound. It's still not a good project because it cannot sustain. So like in Lazada, similar as well, like how I'm also setting up the sustainability team here. The first thing that we want to know is that we need to be an entrepreneur. If the solution is not economically sound, it's not delivering impact, then it can't marry and we have to drop it. We have to try again. Yeah.
So it's all about willing to try, willing to experiment, be quick, and to be able to identify opportunity out there.
And right? Working with different people with different skills. So in Lazada, when you get a project or you think of an idea or you solve a problem, you have to be the person in the company who go and find your team. Who are the people that will come into your team to help you build this or solve this problem together? So it's a lot of networking, a lot of discussion to just really figure out who can do what and who has the interest to do that. Yeah, so there's a lot of room to create.
Yeah. Thank you. How about Eileen, your views on driving more entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think what Jenna spoke about really about finding people. I mean, okay, so when we look at startups to fund, right, and when we have programs where we actually help them figure out what ideas, we bring people together, figure out the problems they want to solve, launch solutions and everything itself. It definitely does start with the openness and the adaptation, the mindset of agility and the mindset of really change, right? Rethinking again. We really look for people who can accept, are brave enough to go out, test the market, accept that their idea really doesn't work, and quickly change again. And honestly, you know, even with so much literature out there, it's amazing how most of us still have a very closed mindset, right? So for us, it's really that's the initial indicator. Then obviously, as we go along, is the tenacity to build. But I do want to kind of talk about venture building within a corporate, because that was also a question you asked, alluded to earlier on, Edmas, which is we actually believe that corporates are a really good place to build. Now, if certain things can be solved, of course, right? So when is a corporate a good place to build? And by the way, building also can be leveraging just on internal talent, or it can be leveraging on some internal talent, and then you combine it with entrepreneurs in residence, right? That you bring on board, or a startup founder that you work together with. Why do we say that corporates are the best place to build, especially in this field? It's because you really have that internal know-how. You know innately what the problems are. Again, Melinda said earlier on that no one will protect what they don't care about, right? And people working in the company, facing their customers day and day again, and seeing all these challenges, they are the ones who really care about it and are the best place to solve it and know the challenges of what you need to get over in order to solve those itself, right? Secondly, we really believe that when you create an innovative culture, you allow people to actually create innovation in the company itself, as you want to attract more and more younger generation to work with you, this is a great retention tool, right? Compared to just acquiring or procuring vendors externally, you actually are then able to build this innovative culture internally, permeates within the organization, and attract and retain the younger people. So we really believe that it's a really strong tool. But now, what do you need to have in place to even be able to build, right? A few things that we look at. Number one is really organization. So taking a very honest look at your organization, the size of it, the pace of it, of like getting approvals, and then the culture as well. So if you really feel that it's hard to move internally, then probably a more ideal approach is using an external party to work together with. But if you think that that can change, then really innovate internally. The second thing is talent. What are the real talent you have internally? Do you always get people coming up with ideas and then they get shot down? That's fine. But at least you know that the ideas are coming up. Then you know that there's this mindset already in place. The third one is industry. What really is the pace of innovation and the distribution of knowledge in your industry itself? So in cases like fintech, obviously financial institutions, the pace of innovation, the knowledge is so dispersed today that you probably don't really need to build anything internally. And that also goes along with tech. If you're in a bio firm, a biomedical firm, obviously, then you know the years that's needed to get your solution to a TRL of 7 or 9 is long. That's again where maybe built internally because you have the time to invest in it. And then ownership. Do you need to own this? If you see that this is something that could potentially be a real big business model for you in the long term, you probably want to own it. That's where you decide, okay, let's just build it for this couple of years because we know it will unlock new opportunities for us in the long term. Yeah, so I think that's a few things.
Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. Maybe just go around the table once more. Just one last sentence. What do you want to see really, in the next couple of years in terms of the technology convergence with sustainability? Maybe we start with Dr. Cheng, David, and Janet and Ling.
Thank you, Edmas. I think it's very important. Once again, the biodiversity loss is a man-made problem. So it's good that human beings being so innovative and all that is very important now. We bring all our ingenuity, all our creativity to help solve this human-created problem. And sometimes people may think that okay, there's so many issues in the world. Why are we trying to protect wildlife? But actually, what it comes down to is actually it is protecting our own quality of life and livelihood. We need the wildlife, we need the biodiversity to ensure our own survival and quality of life. So at the end of the day, it is about us. It's not just like, you don't have to be altruistic. It's about our own livelihood and survival.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cheng. How about David?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of interesting developments in healthcare and biotech as it relates to point of care diagnostics for disease management and detection. So some of these are platform technologies that are really interesting, super novel, because for example, some of these detection methods don't require cold chain for cold storage. And there are platform technologies that can be used in areas such as animal husbandry, veterinary science, or human disease detection. So, you know, from over the counter at a Guardian pharmacy, a la kind of like a Theranos type of technology, without necessarily a blood draw, but saliva based. And so you could potentially use this to diagnose, if you wanted to, various diseases or illnesses that may affect animals potentially. Although, you know, obviously the priority is going to go into human, you know, if it's possible, they'd like to do humans just because the potential market there is much more significant. But again, you know, I stress that this is platform technology. Then we've also seen some startups in the ecosystem look at using synthetic biology to come up with alternatives to the antibiotics that we use to feed animals right now, which are affecting our human health as well, simply because of the ingestion of huge amounts of antibiotics, which then affect our own ability to deal with some of these super bacteria that are prevalent in some hospitals. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and you know, it just never ceases to amaze me about, you know, the deep tech innovation that's kind of going on, not just in Singapore but around the world.
Right. Thank you, David. How about Janet? Janet, you're muted.
Well, I have a wild idea. I suppose next year, 1 year later, if we were to be back in this panel again, I think the team here, we could already form a team with a platform, what we could actually leverage on the deep tech, you know, the deep tech that the NTU has, they know, and then work with Dr. Cheng, who knows a lot of biodiversity and animal care. And then we have Ling, who is really great with like accelerator programs, right? And here on a platform, I see that for Lazada, we are really a connector. Like now we connect buyers and sellers, but can we also connect biodiversity, like sellers or buyers with carbon credits to like the biodiversity wildlife protection? That is a new idea. Like, I don't know if you could make it happen, but I think it's all very possible.
Yeah,
like we can get down to do something.
Discuss further with you on that.
Let's get to work. That's my last call.
Okay, great. Yeah, last but not least, Eileen.
Yeah, for me, so again, areas that I know, I think really looking for solutions in food security, in anything that really reduces consumption, right? Because all this consumption is unsustainable, and that's what has this lasting impact and damaging really our natural resources and our natural lives. So things like not coal from Chile, to just eat just egg and just food, all this sustainable, alternative meals, alternative protein. We've also invested in a company like Mycotech, which uses mushroom to create leather, right? But overall, really reducing that consumption. And I think there's a question in here about e-commerce players, right? And they create waste. I also think the strong e-commerce brands and the D2C brands in particular can actually be the ones who change consumers' mindset. So instead of waiting for consumers to change their mind, imagine if you had a clothing brand, for example, who instead of having this small little section where the clothing is made from sustainable fabric, what if everything was made from sustainable fabric? And sure, the prices might need to just be higher at the start, but that's what you give consumers, right? That way, they actually have the power to change the whole adoption and expedite adoption immediately. Going to a restaurant, instead of having this small little section which is like vegan, what if the entire menu was plant-based and then you just had to top up if you wanted to add protein? That way, again, is already changing the way we are thinking about food. Yeah, so that might not
I love that, Eileen.
Yeah.
That is exactly what we're doing at
really
Lazada. How do we green the whole platform, right? Make it easy, not just for people to shop, but for easy for people to become sustainable every day.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. I have so much fun and insights discussing with you. Thank you so much. Right. Yeah, really, really great discussion. So thank you, David, Dr. Cheng, Janet, Eileen. Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. Over back to you,
Thank you.
Sherry.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you
Thank you,
all.
Edmas.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you, everyone.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists. That was so exciting. I can see all the energy that's coming through and already opportunities, that are coming out of this session. And some wonderful things that we picked out, that it's not now is not the time to have to convince people that we have a climate issue, right? Now is the time to ask how much can we do and what do we do? And all of that can lead to a lot more collaboration, a lot more work together. And it's amazing how well placed Mandai could be in this space as well with the right collaborators.